you're here, I hope, because you're interested in finding out more about native plants and how you can incorporate them into your yard. None of us are going to go home probably and bulldoze our yards. We all have plants. I've lived in the same house for 48 years. When we moved to Pleasant Valley, the streets weren't paved. The gutters were in, but there was no pavement. I was telling them, I grew up on Grant Street, 2405 North Grant, Mohawk, 38274, and University was Hayes Street. Wasn't paved down by Forest Heights. And we had a farm where the Briarwood Apartments are now, because I rode horses and showed. And when I was through with that, Daddy just gave it away because he said it flooded. Nobody'd want that place down there. It was awful. So, hindsight's 22. Also, 2020, I was telling a friend how to get to Farmers Association, and I kept saying, we just go out the New Benton Highway. And I was telling her, and later she called me and she said, I cannot find the New Benton Highway on this map. I said, well, actually that's the interstate, but a long time ago it was the New Benton Highway that went out there. So I'm glad that you're here. We can learn. Natives are new. I don't know if y'all realize, but even our state parks didn't use natives until just a few years ago. They decorated and landscaped with azaleas and all the things that they thought we all wanted and had. And now natives have come back. As I said before, it's good to me because it's like preaching to the choir. But I want you all, as choir members, when you leave here today, I want you to know why natives are important, which ones you can incorporate into your yard, and how to make that distinction of what you can put in your yard in relation to how much work you want to give that plant. Natives are not carefree, but they have a lot of pluses. And it's interesting, as we're going to find out, the research on using native plants in landscaping is a new thing within the last 10 years, and it's been really, the research-based information has come about just since the decline in our pollinators. And because of the decline in the pollinators, big money is now being spent on the research. So you're going to recruit new choir members when you leave here. Definition of native. And it can vary as to how native you want to be. Native plants, the general definition, are plants in a given geographic location, and for the United States it was before the plants that were introduced when the Europeans came. You can do your whole yard in natives and just be choosing natives from the United States. What we generally think of is we narrow it down. You might limit your natives to just the state of Arkansas, or like we did at Whit Stevens, Central Arkansas. Or if you wanted to get pickier, you could get down to just what was here in Little Rock. You'd have a hard time finding reference material for that. But you can kind of, narrow your deal. And like I said, most of us aren't going to just do natives. What's the native bird of the state bird of Arkansas? Mockingbird. And there's a mockingbird feeding on a Yaupon holly, and Yaupon is native, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. As I said before, the real scientific-based research is relatively new. Being involved in Audubon I've been a recycled Audubon member way back when I was on the board and president, and then the years went by, and then they run out of people and you get recycled again. So I hope maybe I'll make it to the third recycling but things that as bird people, was common sense. Well, you can see that more birds are nesting here and the success rate is better, but there wasn't the scientific research that could prove that. It's there now. And like I said, it's being done because of the decline in pollinators. This is a wonderful little story about the Carolina chickadee. And we all recognize chickadees because they tell us their name, chickadee-dee-dee, when they're outside. So that's chickadee. They're a wonderful, friendly little bird. They like humans. They're also a low-key bird. They're good for research and for study because when you catch them and band them, it doesn't stress them. you can turn right around and they'll eat. And the ornithologists, the scientists, the research people doing these know exactly the weight they can add to a bird before that will interfere with its normal activities. But as soon as they're banned, they'll turn around and eat. Some birds, if you did that, they would die from the stress. So they're a good study bird. Like I said, they love people. Normally out, they will get in a tree, a cavity in a tree. But if you put up a bird box, you're going to get a chickadee because they like people. Evidently, they feel secure around us, and they're very readily adapt to humans and being around us. When their babies start to hatch, they're going to start feeding caterpillars. Caterpillars are the #1 food source for nesting birds, and the reason it's an energy correlation. If you're flying to catch the food that's flying to bring back to feed to your youngsters, you're burning energy, and energy is a top priority when you're having to raise a family. Caterpillars are like us going to Frankie's cafeteria. If they're right there, they're not running any place, they're a ready source of food. It takes 78 caterpillars per baby, and they average 6 to 8 babies per nest. 16 to 18 days. Every 3 minutes they feed. It's about 10,000 caterpillars per nest. I love the I don't have a pointer on this one, but my finger. I wish I'd gotten a manicure before I did this. For the ins and outs, I love that slide. The 4 pennies that I passed around, hold those in your hand and you're holding the weight of a chickadee. It's amazing. A full-grown chickadee. Now, larger birds, like a robin that's a mammoth compared to the little chickadee's weight, they're going to need more caterpillars because their babies are larger and eating more. And you can see the size of the birds and the amount of food that it takes to raise them. No food, no live babies. And the parents will abandon the nest because they have to preserve themselves. That's nature's way of doing things. Our native oaks are the most beneficial. They supply the largest number of caterpillars over the longest span of time. You don't even know they're there, the birds do. Crepe myrtles, basically zilch. Bradford pears, basically zilch as far as a food source is going. If you got to go to the Flower and Garden Show this time, or if one of the other 3 times that Dr. Talamy has been in Little Rock, wonderful, and he says in layman's language the relationship between insects, us, and plants. And this is a good book if you want a good resource. He came out with a newer book. I love the pictures. If you're only going to get one, get the first one that I just get that one. They're both good, but the story that I told you about the chickadees, that paper was actually presented at the National Academy of Science. It was a research-based study that went on, so it wasn't just someone in Audubon saying, oh, they like caterpillars. Natives benefit pollinators. That's because native insects and birds have evolved over a long period of time to the native plants that are here and that are available to them. This is from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And you can see why there's now an interest in pollinators. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says it the very best. Without pollinators, we don't eat. And I don't know if you can see this. Can y'all see the little blue thingy there? That's a pollinator drone. Developed by Harvard for millions of dollars because they're so concerned we've got to have pollinators. And if we don't have the ones that are here normally, we've got to come up with something else. So they're already working on ways that we can pollinate plants artificially. But it's kind of a neat deal. Okay. When we think of native plants, we generally think of that relationship between birds, butterflies, insects. What we frequently don't think about are that native plants serve another very, very important service, and that is cleansing the water that we all need to live and survive. This is a real interesting project in coordination with Central Arkansas Water and Audubon, Arkansas. marking storm drains to make people realize that what we put on our yards from runoff is going to go down these storm drains. What we throw out our car windows or what we put in the back of our pickup truck and let fly out is eventually going to go down a storm drain and end up in a creek or a river and pollute it. This is the Audubon, Arkansas group cleaning up Fish Creek. And you can see that huge list of things that go down our storm drains that most of us do not think about. I had gone to Batesville yesterday for a funeral, and I was not surprised but pleased to see that in Batesville they had some of their storm drains marked with artwork, trying to make us all realize that what we do does make a difference. There's some of the Fish Creek litter. Like I told you, this research has just gotten started. It's new. Some of the papers are done, but the reason is because of the drop of pollinators. But now the government has gone in one project with General Mills and government cooperation, spending $6 million trying to put pollinator areas where they, food sources where they need the pollinators so much. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been going to their site for I don't know how many years. They're the ones that sponsor the Fish and Wildlife, the Eagle program that I did. They never had anything on there about pollinators until just recently. Now they have 2 pages. And what they tell us is, this is through research, not gibberish. We make a difference. What we plant in our yards makes a difference. So we have an opportunity. There's so many things that happen that we can't do much about, but this is something that we can. We can make a difference by what we're doing. One of the things that they've discovered and that people knew, even through biblical times, you know, when they would say the mass of insects would come and take out fields, insects migrate, and we usually have thought about it in terms of bad insects decimating crops at given times. And I can remember my mother saying they would sit around the table and pray for certain insects to come because they had certain other insects in the field, and that was the only way they knew to get the bad ones out, and that they would actually at their church services pray as farmers to have these other insects come in to help. It's interesting that now they're doing that with radar and stuff, and they can actually track the insects in mass. They've been doing it with butterfly monarch migration and purple martins, and now they're doing it with other things. What they have found out, as of just research that I was doing the other few, is that we don't know much, and that there's so much for us to learn. Okay, you can't invite the pollinators, birds, all these things to your yard if you're going to continue to put pesticides. The good thing about natives, they're adapted for the area, which means that if you do your research and get them in the right place, they're going to be healthier and happier than non-natives that are put in there, and you're not going to have to use as much supplemental water or any sort of pesticides on them. Right now, the big worry are neonicotinoids. They're made up of several words, and they're concerned. They don't actually kill the insects, the bees per se, but they weaken them, and they're more readily susceptible to the gut bacteria that finishes them off and kills them. There's a lot of hype about these chemicals, a lot of panic that's might be needed, but right now the research isn't actually there to base it, and they're just now working on it. What they have found out is that these stay in the soil longer than they thought they did, and they stay in the plant longer than they thought they did. When they first came out, they assured us that they were not taken up in the nectar of the plants, and now they know that's not true at all. So you need to stay abreast of what's being said. It's on the internet, and you can check things out. Okay, this was an interesting bit of, you can tell I spend too long on piddling on the computer. I happened to find an archive 2004 EPA convention. Over 200 people there were to give reports. What they were discussing is just what we were talking about. Do native plants actually benefit insects? Do they benefit birds? Do they contribute to cleaner water? They had this litany of the same things we've talked about. What they discovered in 2004 was they didn't know from factual research. Just in that amount of time, we're starting to get the research that's being done. The only thing that they could agree on through research was that if you're going to put in natives, they need to look nice in your yard or other people aren't going to like them. If you're going to put them in a public area, you have to go ahead and use the same design principles that you would for non-natives, maybe even a little bit more, just because of the aggressiveness of some of them. It even gave the ratio if you have water to how much manicured area you need, that you need sidewalks, that you need rock walls, things that designate that this is a well cared for area and we do care about it. I was doing one of the very first talks I did about natives, and a man said, I'm going to put them in because I don't want to have to mow or do anything. Well, you can see down here, we're an ambassador for natives, whether we like it or not. And if you don't do it the correct way, you're going to not be an ambassador in the good way. I happened to find online a PowerPoint that was done by the American Landscape Association. And it started out talking about natives. The number one thing it said was more landscape architects would use natives in their design because their clients asked for them, but they could not find sources. And that's the same thing that we're all going through. It said, do we need good design when we need natives? What does it say? Yes. Let's do that again. Design, do we need it? Yes. Okay, well-designed and properly installed landscape can increase your property value by 17%. Poorly can decrease it, waste your time and money, or be a liability risk. Waste time and money. That's what I'm hoping when we go through all this that you'll be able to avoid, because we're going to look for some keywords about each plant to know whether it's one that you want to choose or not. Okay, what are we going to plant and what are our design things? Unity, that means that one of everything that you like that you see stuck in your yard is not a good design thing. I can attest to that because I'm a onesie person. I can't live without it. And instead of looking at a place and doing it like I should, saying, okay, I have an area here. It gets this amount of shade. It's relatively moist. I need a plant about 2.5 feet tall. Let me look and see what things are available, and I will intelligently choose. I go someplace and see something. Oh, I've got to have that. I'm going to stick it right there because I have one hole. Sometimes when I dig, there was already something down in there that just wasn't quite up yet, so you have to be careful. I'm not a good design person. Bruce Wesson, who was in school with me, who looks younger than I do, he can put things together. Linda Fulbright, if you're a master gardener, she's at the WIT Steve, is good at putting things together. I can't, but I know how to cheat. And I cheat.
Because I've got a good supervisor.
Okay, well.
Or should I say motivator?
Motivator, that's a good, yes, supervisor and motivator. I can cheat because I can find in magazines like Fine Gardening, and they'll have a plot and they'll say, plant this around your mailbox. Order 6 of these, 4 of these. Well, most of those plants don't go here or might not be, but I can look and I can say, okay, they want me to plant this. Let me look that up. What is that? It's a plant that gets 18 inches tall, and then I can go through and make intelligent choices on my native plant list and put them in there. Mother and I used to drive around in the spring and look at all the bank buildings because they always have all those you know, they spend a fortune having people plant all their front drive-through places. Well, they would put combinations that we would never think about putting together, but they did it and it looked good, so that gave us ideas. Okay, you need to plant in tiers, common sense, but that does not mean you need to line your yard up like the choir loft. You know, you want to vary the height because different birds feed at different heights, different bugs, even butterflies are going to be at different heights. You need to have evergreen and deciduous. What does deciduous mean? Loses its leaves. That's right, and the evergreens we need. You want to plant in drifts, and like I said, one is not a drift. But your drift doesn't have to be exactly all the same plants. It can be something with similar leaf form or flower bloom time. You can kind of cheat on that, but just having one sitting out there by itself doesn't really get it. Butterflies are much more attracted to drifts than they are a single plant. Bees love drifts. Bees' favorite colors, and all this is on the massive thing, PDF if you want to get, the colors. On butterflies, they like a flower that has a flat top, like a purple coneflower or a black-eyed Susan, because they land to feed. The insects can adjust to just about any shape of flower. That insect will adjust to certain ones because they've evolved. Like I said, native insects and birds have evolved to deal with the native plants that they're going to need to survive. How many of y'all know Dan Shyman, Dr. Dan the Birdman? He's wonderful. We were both giving a talk at the Flower and Garden Show. We were sitting together in between, and I do a lot, and I'm not, if they were sitting here, I would say the same thing because I get so put out with them. And Audubon, Arkansas, working on their gardens. They're all really young. They're very smart. They're very focused on certain things, and maintenance is not one of the things they're focused on. And I keep saying, we have to do this. It can't get looking bad because then it takes twice as long to get it cleaned up. We have to have a schedule. I made them a schedule, but you have to look at the schedule and do the schedule to get it done. I even put it in great big. Anyway, we have to do these things. This week we do this week. Well, when I was talking, Dan said, well, can't we teach people that loose look is the way it should be? And I said, you just gave a talk about birds pollinating flowers. And there was a whole section on this weird little bird that's beak was bent just like that. And that little bird pollinates a flower that's bent just like that. The little beak and the little bird go right together, which Dan said means that they were made for each other, but they also can't get away from each other, and that bird's chance of survival if something happens to that one plant is zilch. Over time, as humans, we have an innate design quality in us. The certain things of good design appeal to all of us. We might not all like the same thing. You might like Danish modern and you might like French provincial. But if a room has good design, you're going to find it relaxing, you're going to find it appealing, you're going to be drawn to it. And that's the same way it is in a garden. Okay. We've lived in our house 49 years. And when we moved in, I had roses and daylilies. Now I have ferns and hostas because over that amount of time, my trees got very large and the whole thing changed. I had been raising roses. I had native heirloom roses before it was popular, simply because as I drove the state doing Eagle programs and I would see roses out where an old home place had been, I would save them. Unless there was somebody on the porch with a gun or something, then I didn't save them. And bring them home. And they were great. And then years later, I started noticing my roses what is wrong? They're lax. I'm getting more disease. They're just not flowering like that. What could it be? Now, this isn't a good thing for me to be telling y'all since I'm supposed to be knowing what I'm talking about. But anyway, I went to Conway to do a program, and while I was there, a man and woman who compete in rose, you know, the major rose deal with the roses, were there, and they had invited some of us to come to their house to eat lunch afterwards. And when I got there, I was looking at his rose beds, which were amazing. And I saw some over there, and I said, well, something about them. He said, well, they don't get as much sun. They get 15 minutes less sun, blah, blah. And I thought, and how do you know this? And so I said, how do you know that? And he said, I timed them. And I thought, okay. I think maybe this rings a bell with me. Maybe, could be that this isn't the same. And then we had an advanced master gardener training thing, and Bob Byers, that was the head of Garvin Gardens, came and talked, and he said the first thing they do when they get the landscape architects is have them go out and do a sunshade evaluation of a given area. And then he went on and told this, I didn't think this up. He said, what you need to do in your own yard is a minimum of 4 times a year. You need to go out at 8, 12, and 4 and actually look at your yard, take notes. Now you can do it with your phone, just taking pictures, and see where your sun and shade is. And he said if you do it, when you hear Ned Permy and Little Todd say, today's the first day of spring, hit it. Get out there at 8 o'clock. You know, but it has to be at the same time. The first day of winter, the first day of spring, the first day of summer. If those don't appeal to you, choose other times, but have them designated and then do it on, you know, do it regularly and do it periodically because it will change. I bet most of us, if we went out, we'd be surprised by what we'd find out because it's just not what we think. The other thing, how many of y'all have had a soil sample done? Yeah. A soil sample is the most important thing you can do. And Dan and I are chair of the Pulaski County Rose Garden, and it had been left in horrid neglect. And when we got there, we said something to him about, well, we've got yellow roses. We've been treating them. We know they've got a disease, blah, blah. We said, what was the soil test? Well, we don't have money for a soil test. Soil tests are free, and that's something you should take advantage of. They might not be for here on out, but they're free now. When we took it, the rose beds were really high in phosphorus. What does too much phosphorus do? Cause your plants to turn yellow, the chloride. So treating for disease wasn't what needed to be done. And your soil sample will help you make those decisions. Most of the plants, I'd say 95% of the plants that we're going to talk about require acidic soil, and that's what we have in Little Rock most all places. If it doesn't, I put a note by it, and you can supplement or do things, but I wouldn't. And some of them will adjust. Okay, for every plus on a plant, there's a minus. If you really like that plant, you have to decide whether that plus is going to outweigh the minus in your mind, or whether you'd rather choose something else. Some pluses have, you know, there might be 3 or 4 minuses, 3 or 4. You want a 3 or 4 pluser and a 1 minus if it comes to that. Now remember, we're starting tall to short. Some of the trees, we've already talked about the oak, most beneficial for birds, the caterpillars, the shade, but it's huge. And if you plant one in your yard, for most of us, and I don't know, I did a little survey of last time, how many of y'all have acreage? This primarily goes for those of us that have a regular sized yard, because then you need to really pay attention to what you're putting in. Your oak might be giving more shade to your neighbor than it is to you, so you need to think about those things. Maples, great, the roots can be a problem. And in a small yard, that means your driveway, your sidewalk, can be raised up, or maybe the edge of your neighbor's house if you plant it over there, so you need to pay attention. Michael Durr, and you're going to hear me say his name throughout this, is the god of shrubs and trees. He's actually from the University of Georgia, and he has done research, written all kinds of books, papers. He's fabulous. And he says the black gum is a tree that has been sinfully neglected in the American landscape. They have a taproot, so you've got to leave it after you plant it. You can't move them around if they've got a taproot. But they're a good tree because they don't get so big, but the main thing is, I always want to say wings, their limbs don't go out as far as on an oak. So you have more of a pyramid-shaped tree that doesn't take up your whole suburban lot. And the name is wonderful. Nissus, anyway, it means nymph of the woods. I mean, who could deny that?
But that's the one, is that one that makes those gumballs?
No, that's sweet gum. Black gum. This is black gum. And if you look at the Latin names, you'll be able to use the Latin names, not the common names. Although I'm going to use the common names here because I can't pronounce the Latin names. Okay, plants and energy makes a huge difference. If you plant your house 30 degrees north of due west in Little Rock, it will tremendously lower your air conditioning bills because it's going to break that hot afternoon sun. It needs to be a deciduous tree because then when it drops its leaves, they'll get the heat from the wintertime. Also, while we've got this up, see this uaex.edu? That's the University of Arkansas Extension. They have wonderful information about just anything you might need plant-wise. Go to the site and then go to Yard and Garden. And it's all Arkansas-based information. And when you're looking for information, you want to go to ones that use .edu, .org, and I forgot on this slide, it's going to come up several more times, or .gov. Don't go to Happy Jane's Funny Plant Yard or something. That information is not going to be factual in all probability. Okay, again, see these little, this is the black gum. See those little bitty berries? They've discovered they're critical for migrating birds. They're literally power balls. And birds desperately need them as they're migrating. You have to have a male and female tree on those, and the females are the ones with the berries. Okay, shorter trees. Redbuds and dogwoods, and y'all are probably very familiar with those, although I'm always surprised. A lot of people don't know that redbuds or dogwoods are native, and we have numerous dogwoods to choose from out of the native dogwoods. One you don't want on a small land is the rough leaf dogwood, which is one of my favorites to look at, but it suckers every place. It's good if you have a bank for erosion or something. But the redbud has these real pretty little heart-shaped leaves, and they're important because it's one of the first trees to leaf out, and they're very high in vitamin C and pollinators. So are the flowers. Our early Native Americans and early settlers used to eat the redbud leaves and pickle the flowers or eat them like you would do English peas or something. How they knew they were extremely nutritious, I don't know, but they learned that from the Native Americans and have used them. Well, pollinators get the same good boost because they're nutritious for them too. Okay, some that we might not have thought about for a small yard that are wonderful. The fringe tree, male and female, but they both are real pretty. The smoke tree, which if you have it, and there's for almost every one of these, there's a European counterpart. So on the handout it'll have the Latin name. Be sure you're getting the American one and not the European one. The European one's generally purple, but this one has beautiful fall color. This is the smoke tree we're talking about. The silver bell, Michael Durr says, one of the most, a tree with perfect attributes, but sorely underused in the American landscape. They're easy to grow, really pretty, pretty fall color, readily utilized, and like I said, they'll do well in a small location. Shrubs, the backbone of your garden, because they give structure. They're easier care than a lot of flowers are. And several years ago, we were going to move, and the person that was our real estate person's mother is a good friend of mine, and the mother, was a past president of Master Gardeners. And when little Ellen, the real estate person, came to the yard, she was looking around, she said, "Oh, Miss Jane, you're just like my mother. You have too many plants." When the people come, they're going to say, "I don't want to take care of it." She said, "You're going to have to take out a bunch of that and put in shrubs." People don't see shrubs as much work as they do plants. So I did some of that, and then we were going to move on Tuesday. Roy Dudley was coming, the mover was set, everything, and they called Thomas on Thursday while he was playing golf and told him the deal had fallen apart, and we didn't have any place to go. He didn't tell me that until he got home. He didn't think it was that important, I guess. Anyway, now I've sworn we're going to move when he's 76. I made him sign a thing and put it in the lock box so y'all can remind him that we're going to do. But the shrubs are our next. We've done trees, and now we're moving down. Now the first shrub, I didn't know where they're putting the tree part or the shrub part. The American holly. American hollies are a native holly. There are a lot of cultivars, so now you can choose size better. The original ones would get up to like 50 feet tall. You need a male and a female. The females have the berries. They're very healthy. They do extremely well. They're also grow like molasses. They are such a slow grower. Some of the cultivars are faster growing. Now, the average growth was barely 6 inches a year. So you had to do it when you were 20, not when you're 70. Okay, 9-bark, another very popular, wonderful shrub. They come in purple. They're cultivars. The cultivars work. That's a silk moth over there, and I don't think that's a really good thing to have, but it likes the 9-barks. The 9-barks, you can trim to size after they bloom. You'll lose the berries, but you can still, plus now you can choose cultivars that stay a nice size. We're almost at the end of the 9-bark range, 8. Well, for years we were 7B, but now we're 8A. So in Arkansas, they do much better if they get some afternoon shade. What do 90% of the plants like? Morning sun, afternoon shade, unless you're a tomato or okra.
Grow fast or slow?
Fast, pretty fast. My yard is just the opposite. I get all morning shade. I get a burst of full-blown afternoon sun briefly and then more shade. But they do well here. Very drought tolerant after they're established. And a lot of the plants are. When we say drought tolerant, when you buy something that says drought tolerant and you put it home and you don't water it regularly, it's going to die. And that means after they're established. And your overhead oscillating sprinkler does not count as a drink of water. They come in a little root ball. The little roots haven't gone out. They're still balled. You've got to water right there. And then it will go on out. The first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, the third year it leaps. Okay, spirea. These are Japanese spireas. Anthony Waterman's spirea, the standard of bridal wreath. Saw it when I was coming down the road. But we have a wonderful Arkansas native spirea, Spirea tomentosa, the steeplebush. They gave it the name steeplebush because the little blooms reminded them of the church steeples. Steeplebush gets about 4 by 4. It will sucker, but slowly. Has beautiful bark. If you deadhead it, it will bloom and bloom and bloom all summer. It's a really good, if you have rabbits, it's iffy. They like it. I have rabbits. I don't have just rabbits. I have herds of rabbits. How many of y'all have deer? On the one that I'm handing out, I made sure it said deer resistant if it was, because that's such a pain. Okay, hardy hibiscus. This one is the white one, and the red one, a lot of people call it swamp mallow, swamp hibiscus. These others are the ones that when you're riding around just outside Little Rock, or even in parts of Little Rock, in the ditches, you see them blooming. Now they're doing a lot of cultivars out of them. Bugs like them, and they choose the leaves. But if you choose the ones with the skinny leaves to start with, they don't look as chewed and ratty because they're already kind of frail looking. So they'll do a little bit better. And I've told this story last time, I'll tell it again. About 6 or 7 years ago, and y'all probably read it, in North Little Rock, a woman came home and the police had gone in her backyard and pulled out her swamp. They thought it was marijuana. And it is kind of fun. In fact, Mother one time said, "Oh, I want one of those. I shall be the talk of the neighborhood." Okay, these are the ones that they're kind of combining, but they still work for wildlife, but they're kind of coming up with new things. One of my favorites, Turk's Cap, 4x4. When I first got my plant, the woman called it hummingbird bells, so down in Dumas, and I was driving along the highway and I'd seen it going, and when I was coming back, the woman was out in her yard and I got out and said, "What is that?" She said, "Oh, it's hummingbird bells." And I was talking to her, she just yanked a piece of it up and gave it to me. Now you can buy it. There's a white one, a pink one, and the red one. You can roast the berries. It's actually pollinated by hummingbirds. So if you have it, they're going to be there because they love it. It's also a magnet for just about anything else. I had a friend with state parks over. We were sitting in the backyard and she said, "My gosh, what is that plant?" And we were talking about it. She said, she was at Lake Catherine at the time. She said, "I'm going to plant that down there," because when she did her insect talk, she said there's always something around it. And y'all might not realize us talking about natives. It wasn't until recently that Arkansas State Parks planted native plants at the parks. They always just planted azaleas and whatever else. The native plant movement is relatively new, and it's exciting to be able to be involved in it. Viburnums. Michael Durr says there's a viburnum for every situation, but you need to do your research to choose. The one called dentatum has straight stems, and Native Americans used them to make their arrows, so that's the name arrowwood. There are a lot of different cultivars. I got Miss Muffin out here a few years ago, and it's been great. Since then, I've gotten several ones called papoose. They only get 4 feet tall. So, and make pretty fall color. The berries, they're, you know, you can do a little research and come up. Possum haw, cultivars. Count Pulaski. This one was found on Rodney Parham before Rodney Parham was paved part of the way by Larry Lohman, and he introduced it to the plant trade. Black haw prunifolium. This is the one that Michael Durr says is the best of all the viburnums because it takes a wider range of sun, shade, wet or dry. It's not very particular, and it's not prone to mildew. So there are cultivars with that, but you just have to look for prunifolium in the name. Beautyberry, another favorite. That's why I have one of everything, because I have a lot of favorites. The beautyberry, 4x4, the berries, it can either be a really ugly bush or it can be magnificent. And if you don't cut it to the ground in February, just like you do a butterfly bush, it's going to be ugly. They bloom on new wood. If you cut them clear to the ground, they're going to be bushier, and the berries will go from the bottom all the way up to the top. If you leave them, your berries are just going to be on the tops. Then the bushes get open and lax. If you put them in too much shade, they'll be lax, but they do like shade. And they will grow in dense shade. They just won't berry quite as much.
Is it too late to take them down?
How many do you have?
2.
Take down one. If it doesn't work, you've got to. She said, "Is it too late to take them down?" I said, "How many do you have?" And she said, 2. I said, "Take down one. See what happens." The birds love them, and I've had people tell me, "That's not true. I planted mine and there weren't any birds on it." That's because the berries persist into winter. And as the berries are on the bush, they dry. And as they dry, the nutrients become more concentrated. So the birds eat them when they're beautyberry raisins, not early on in the life, although they will eat some of them. There's a white form that's harder to propagate. These can be seeding nuisances because all those berries are going to seed if they do. The good thing is if you don't let them stay, if you get them that year when they seed, you can just pull them right out. If you leave them, you've got more of a problem. Oh, let me tell you one other thing. The leaves, you can rub them. They have a wonderful, I think, fragrance. Other people call it odor. Depends on if you like it or not. But they actually have an insect repellent in them called carpinol that the U.S. government has patented. It's a natural insect repellent. Native Americans and early pioneers put them around their cabins and on the floors of their cabins. Shrubby St. John wort. The hypernicums, by all of them, are relatively short-lived plants, 6-7 years, but they reseed so you can put more out. On the hypernicums, do the same thing. You cut them clear down in February. They bloom on new wood. It'll make them bushy, nice. After they bloom, shear them to a pretty shape that you want because the foliage is interesting on them and they'll look nice and good. Lead plants. There's several different, it's hot. Lead plants, there's several different lead plants. Some get tall. This one, canescens, stay short and shrubby. The blooms look like they're like 6 to 8 inches. Don't be disillusioned. They're like 2 to 3 and they don't last too long. But after the blooms, you get this really, really neat leaf that has a grayish silver cast to it. That's why pioneers thought lead, you know, they hated them. And this was called prairie shoestring or devil's shoelace. But the roots were so, I mean, they are drought tolerant after they get going. The early pioneers, the tools that they had for their plows would not cut through the roots of these, and they hated them. But butterflies love them, and they really add a neat look to your landscape because the foliage is so different than average. Fragrant sumac, another one of my favorites. You can cut these after they bloom. The females make the berries. Early pioneers made lemonade, and there's a really neat one called low grow that's a ground cover. Spreads out to about 8 feet, has a beautiful fall color. In the spring, you can run your lawnmower or your weed eater over it and keep it down to about 4 to 6 inches, well, 4, because it's going to grow up some, and it'll make a really pretty ground cover. It likes a lot of sun. Michael Durr says this plant is the beauty and the beast of the plant world. That this is an underused, wonderful hydrangea, so you can see the name, arborescens, but only if you take care of it. Again, in February, you cut it to the ground. Blooms on new wood. That'll make it bushy, full, and pretty. And after it, or as it's blooming, as the blooms fade on this one, if you cut that bloom off, it'll rebloom. You'll get 2 blooms out of them, 2 bloom cycles out of them. Don't do this on the other one. That does not apply to all your hydrangeas. Oak leaf, don't cut it to the ground in February. Oak leaves are barely native in Arkansas, but we've adopted them. But they are here. But
Excuse me, Jane, why was that other one called the beast?
because if you don't take care of it, it looks ugly. Okay, Yopon holly, and I live in Pleasant Valley, and every house has a Yopon holly on one end, some other kind of a holly, and a bunch of azaleas going down the middle. Yopon hollies come with yellow berries. You can get cultivars. There's a weeping form. You can hack them, cut them, doesn't phase them. You can shape them any way you want them to be shaped. They're also the only Native American plant that makes caffeine. And Native Americans made a drink that was so strong it made them vomit, and that's why they got the name vomiter. And early settlers used it as a form of coffee. And that other slide that I was showing, during World War II, when the rationing came, people went back to using Yopon as their coffee source, and you can now get online and pay $1 million for a little thing of Yopon. It's back. It's the in coffee drink. Wax myrtle. This is evergreen, which gives it, Yopon is evergreen. This is evergreen, which is good. It can be a nuisance. It suckers, it grows rapidly. It's so popular with migrating birds that this bird was called the wax myrtle warbler. Now we call them butterbutts, but because that's all, yeah, when we're. But the little berry is another one of those high nutrition berry that birds need for migration. The good thing about wax myrtle is you can cut it anytime you want to cut it, however you want to cut it, and you're not going to kill it after it's established. At Audubon, Arkansas, they planted it under the porch. Didn't do anything to it, so it was literally taking the porch off. They got up there and cut it down a little bit. Well, what happened after they cut it a little bit? For every stem they cut, they got 2. And so it made double the trouble. And I said, we're getting out there, we got a chainsaw stems and cut it down. We're now keeping it about 3 feet, 2.5. You can do that, but you have to keep after it because, like I said, it'll sucker and it's a rapid grower. You can see it at Heifer. Whit Stevens has some. I don't know if they have it at Pinnacle or not, but it is a wonderful plant, but kind of work intensive. We have Arkansas native azaleas. None of them are evergreen. They're all deciduous. Most of them, 2 of them that I'm going to talk about, have wonderful clove fragrance. They do sucker. After they bloom, you can cut them and shape them. And the 2 that we have here are white swamp azalea and the one called white. Some of them can be really, and on that handout it gives you the Latin names. Some of them can be really picky about growing here. But those 2 are not picky at all, easy to do. Buckeyes. When the buckeye blooms, hang out your your hummingbird feeder. Buckeyes are pollinated by hummingbirds. They're a neat plant. They have interesting foliage, beautiful bloom, and we have more than one kind of buckeye here in Arkansas. Like I said, pollinated by hummingbirds. The buckeye is very poisonous. If you have grandchildren, pick it up because if they put it in their mouth and eat it, it can be, if you have a dog that eats everything, I have a friend that has a dog that eats rocks. So if your dog does it, it can make them really sick. The other thing about buckeyes, they have a taproot. Don't grow out here and try to dig up one. You'll just kill it. But the other thing about them, after they bloom, and you will be cutting off the buckeye if you do that, but you might not want, you can cut them and shape them and keep them the shape, but they bloom real early. So they're through by mid-August, which means by mid-August, they're looking ratty and ugly. And people see them and they think, oh, I want that out in my front yard by the deal. Well, in August they're thinking, ooh, I wish that wasn't out in my front yard where everybody can see it. You can cut them down when they start looking bad. It won't hurt them. But what you need to do is don't put them out. Put something where you have something in front of them to kind of draw your eye away from the fact that they're through for the year. New Jersey tea, another one of my favorites. But if you have rabbits, rabbit magnet. The New Jersey tea, people don't realize 60% of a hummingbird's diet's insects, not sugar water. Sugar water gives energy. They have to have the same things we do. Protein, calcium, they have to have those things to live, particularly when they're doing their eggs, which the eggshell's all calcium, and when they're trying to raise their babies who have to have strong, what was that Wonder Bread deal? Strong arms, strong legs, and all that. Well, this little New Jersey tea blooms at the same time the hummers are laying their eggs, and it's covered with no-see-um insects. You won't even know they're there, but the hummers love them, and that's what they'll feed their young. 2 different kinds, the azure summer and spring butterfly is a host plant, and the mottled. And the teapots there because this is the plant when the American Revolution, when we dumped the tea overboard, this is what they used as a tea supplement, and people still use it now. Virginia sweet spire, great plant, has a normal weeping shape, fabulous honey fragrance. I mean, a really good fragrance, but it'll sucker. In fact, Carl Hunter used to say, there's nothing in a yard that can't be solved with a sharp hoe. And you can get those suckers out with that. Beautiful fall color. They're cultivars now, and after the bloom, you can cut it back to shape it just the way you would any shrub. But it does well in containers, so if you want to avoid the suckers, you can do that. Hearts bursting forth. Deer magnet. In fact, when it's out in the wild, deer, it won't survive because once the deer find it, they just eat it down to nothing. It's like I do Snickers or Cheetos. There's nothing left, and then that night I think, oh, well, I don't have any Cheetos left. Euonymus, it gets scale. Euonymus and scale are synonymous. But is that not the neatest bloom you've ever seen? I mean, it is interesting. Sunshade, they'll take water or dry. And these are cedar waxwings from eating nandinas. I don't know why I put that in after the hearts are bursting forth, but the nandina berries naturally contain cyanide. And because cedar waxwings gorge themselves, they get too much and it kills them. Cardinals will do it not all year, but sometimes during breeding season because it also makes them redder. And the redder you are, the more attractive you are to the girls. So
Did you get rid of your nandinas?
you don't have to get rid of the nandina bushes, but you need to cut your berries off. Use them at Christmas before the wax myrtles are coming through. The cedar waxwings and then. Okay, flowers, think. And remember, how are you going to think? You're going to think by going to these research places, the EDU, ORG, GOV sites, and get good information. Do they spread by rhizomes? If they spread by rhizomes, be scared. It depends a little bit on how deep the rhizomes go. The better soil you have, the more spread you'll have, and the deeper the rhizomes. We put out lizard's tail at Whit Stevens. I have some in my yard in a dry place, and it stayed relatively contained. We put it down there where their massive air conditioner unit drained because it was it was so wet there it smelled. And we wanted something to soak that water up.
And what was it that y'all planted?
Lizard's tail. Cirrus, I've forgotten, it's on the sheet that I'm going to get. It came up. Now this was down by the sidewalk. It came up the whole yard lengths away up by the building. They went from this wall to that back wall. We started digging them out. They were bigger than my thumb, and they were down 1.5 feet in the ground. And every time we broke one, the next week when we went back, we had 2. And we'd hack at that one, and we'd have 4. They always do even numbers. I mean, it was like Godzilla was after us. It was horrible. Think, rhizomes, ooh. Be careful about poisonous plants. Think if you're going to have children in your yard. When we did the Whit Stevens, one of the things that Neil, the director, who's sweet, said, oh, well, we want the children to get in the garden. Half of those plants have something on them that if they put it in their mouth, it's either prickly, poisonous. Well, we weren't going to be responsible for that. And the school groups that come will have 3 or 4 mothers, and they're back there at the back talking, and these little kids are ripping out your plants and going berserk. And if you say anything to them, the mothers get huffy. I mean, so think of what's going to be happening and what you're going to be having. Okay. Do they have a clumping or spreading growth habit? Does it sucker? Do you have rabbits or deer? New plants, water on the root ball. Plants that like wet, this is a deal. If plants like wet, you can usually wean them to a little bit more dry. If plants like dry, you can't teach them to swim. It seems like the dry ones don't give as much as the wet ones do. Okay, Amsonia, and I've only got a minute more. This is an wonderful plant. It was all in Southern Living a few years ago. It hit the deal. It was the big deal. Cut them down by half after they bloom, and it'll keep them from opening up. If they open up, other plants will get in there and you can't get them out. There's just almost impossible to weed. Plus it keeps them from flopping and being ugly. They have a beautiful fall color. Bee balm, there's clumping bee balm and spreading bee balm. And unless you like just working in your yard every day pulling out stuff, go for the clumpers. Mint family, how do we know it's in the mint family? Square stem. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckias. There's perennial, annual, and biannual Rudbeckias. Read the labels. Different shapes. Butterfly weed. That's the big deal right now. We've got to help the monarchs. Well, we do. But the two that are best in Arkansas are the clumper ones. Tuberosa, the orange one, and swamp, which does not need a swamp. It's incarnata. It'll do fine in a regular garden soil. They are clumped and well behaved. The other ones, some of them are okay. They'll spread, they shoot out. You never know where they're going to be. It's kind of like Easter, where you're looking for the Easter eggs, because you'll go out there and say, oh, what is that? Oh, it's butterfly weed of whatever kind. They'll come up. One of them, the Sericea, the common one, can get over 8 feet tall, and it'll go easy from me to the wall. I mean, it'll spread a long way. It has a really good fragrance and hard to eradicate. I mean, it puts out things that go to China. Tuberosa, that's the one we're talking about, and I'm going to take just a minute. When you plant milkweed, you're going to get large and small milkweed bugs, and you've seen them. There's nothing you can do about them. Don't do anything about them. They can be a nuisance, but can you spray your plants with any sort of an insecticide? No, because you're wanting monarchs to come. You'll also get these aphids all up and down the stems, orange, and if you pull them off, it's like you've eaten Cheetos because your fingers are all orange color. You can pull those off with your fingers, sometimes spray with water, but if you spray with a strong stream of water, there's a chance you're going to dislodge your monarch eggs.
Did you squash the aphids?
Yeah, you can squash them with your fingers. Okay, here are ladybug eggs. There's the ladybug pupa over there. There they are, just hatched. And look, ladybugs, good to eat aphids, but they also eat the monarch. And people will order ladybugs thinking they're doing the nature-wise thing to get rid of these others. Just forget it and let nature take its course. Here are the monarch eggs. They're usually under the leaf. The monarch makes glue sticks her little egg on there. And you can see if you're pulling stuff off, you're likely to dislodge her stuff too. Cardinal flowers, and I saw they had some out there. Cardinal flowers are one of the prettiest flowers ever. And they're also one of the hardest to grow. Carl Hunter said, when you plant your cardinal flower, let it go to seed. And wherever the seeds come up and take hold, decide that's where you want your cardinal flower. And his was over by his air conditioning unit on the side of his house. Anytime you went over there, you had to go over and see this ugly air conditioning unit and the copper crud that came out. But you also got to see a beautiful stand of cardinal flower. It's picky. Native Americans used it as a love potion. The blue one is much easier to grow. Everything likes it just as much. And the Native Americans used it to cure syphilis. One was to help you get the syphilis, and the other one. Okay. But the blue lobelia is so much easier to grow, and it's just a gorgeous plant. Coreopsis, again, there's annual and perennial. Some gets huge, some get short. You have to do your research. Some of it can take over the world. Most of it, in fact all of it, you need to deadhead it, and you can either deadhead it individually or you can deadhead it with hedge clippers or a good strong string weed eater. And just let it come back up again. And it likes dry. Crossvine. When you cut the stem of a crossvine, there's a little cross inside there. That's where it got the name. Hummingbirds love it. It's not the same as trumpet vine. Trumpet vine's naughty. Crossvine is much, that's trumpet vine, but I couldn't pass that up. I love that picture. When you're going to plant a fern, before you buy it, before you think about it, before you do anything, think fern, clumper, runner. What am I buying? If it's not a clumper, you need to be thinking about what you're going to put in. Christmas fern is a clumper, evergreen. Native early settlers used it for their Christmas decorations, hence the name. It does kind of go limp during the winter, but it's wonderful and does clump. There are places where a runner would be. You know, you might have a strip by your driveway or something and want it. Ask your neighbors if it, you know, if there's not a barrier, because they're going to get it too. Wild ginger, it's not evergreen, but it is the most wonderful little ground cover. It can spread, it can be a nuisance. The little flower is so weird. People call it the little brown jug, pig's feet. It's pollinated by ants. Early settlers used the roots for ginger, just the same as ginger, cheap man's ginger. Indian pink, another one of my favorites. It likes shade. There's nothing pink about it except the roots. The flowers red and yellow. If you let it bloom and cut it, you'll get another full bloom. If you let that bloom and cut it, you'll get a few third blooms on it. It reseeds, they're easy to pull up. Iris, the copper iris, one of Carl Hunter's favorite, blooms for about 23 minutes. Look at it quickly when you see it. And then you have to be working on the leaves to make sure they can get messy looking on all of them. You need to pull that out. Passion flower, people, it's so pretty and so naughty. It spreads by suckers. Even if you pull off the maypop, the fruit, to eliminate the seeds, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to go every place, and it can be a real nuisance. But it sure is. If you put it on a trellis, it's still going to come up everywhere. But if if you're willing to use your sharp hoe, have at it. Evening primrose. The nickname for evening primrose, pink ladies. At Whit Stevens, we refer to it as the pink hussies. We put it in because we didn't have that many plants and we wanted a quick fill for people to see. Well, you can't get rid of it. It spreads by rhizomes. It goes every place. After it's bloomed, it looks ugly. It gets a reddish tint to the leaf with little black spots, and everybody that walked by reminded us that we had disease in our beds, and we've been trying to get it out for years. It's amazing. If you're the highway department and you have 47 miles down the median, could not be a better plant. Native poinsettias. Y'all probably didn't know we had a native poinsettia. They are so neat, and you can pinch them back and make a nice rounded little plant that's real interesting because it gets the red brackets in it just like a real poinsettia. Well, maybe ours was the real one. I don't. Purple coneflower, cut them. When they start to come up, cut them back. It'll make them bushier. If you have a big stand, you can cut some 1 week, wait 7 or 8 days, cut the next stand, wait, cut the next stand, and then you'll have continual bloom. As soon as they bloom, start deadheading. Those will rebloom again after you deadhead the first time, and it'll keep the plants, and it'll keep that, the seeds can be a real thug. If you want to leave some for birds, pick a little section in your clump so the seeds drop down instead of going out into the neighbors that you've got. Some of the cultivars aren't good, and you can tell by looking. The ones with the funny heads, there's no place for the butterfly to land. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, blanket flower. Wet feet kills it. They're a neat plant, but it has to be well drained, well drained, well drained. Rattlesnake master, neat. Solomon seal, good for shade under trees, really pretty. Drought tolerant after it's established, good. There's a variegated one. Columbine, really neat plant, can reseed every place, has a taproot. Get after the seedlings quickly if you don't want them there. After it blooms, shear it almost down to the ground because they get leaf miners. If you don't shear them down, they look ugly. If you shear them, they'll come back and make a little plant about 6 inches tall with real pretty blue-green, thick, nice foliage. False indigo, there's blue, yellow, white, cream color. After it blooms, you can shear that some and it'll keep it from flopping. When it's going downhill, it gets really ugly. Part of it, it'll turn black. The stalks a lot of times will turn black. You can cut that down to 4 inches. Don't worry about it, it'll come back. In fact, those things can live in the same place for 40 years. They're really hard to take out if you change your mind. Helianthus, annuals and perennials, and before you plant, think. They can take the world. You can cut them to, you can cut anything and make it fit the size you want if you're willing to experiment a little bit and know when it's going to bloom. But these can be huge and they can just take over. Native honeysuckle, really good. And this is one, these goldenrods are important because they're an important food source for migrating birds and pollinators, because when the pollinators come to feed on them, the birds feed on the pollinators. There are two kinds of goldenrod, the clumping ones and the rhizomes. You will be unhappy with yourself if you do not make a wise selection. The ones with the rhizomes can be extremely aggressive. And by aggressive, I mean pretty soon the only thing you're going to have is that goldenrod. They will crowd out everything. But the clumping ones are great. You can also put them in a pot. They do not cause allergies. They have thick pollen that has to be pollinated by an insect to move it from place to place. Ragweed is the one that causes the allergies, and it has airborne pollen that goes every place. Okay, asters, again, rhizomes. As soon as they come up, cut them. Midsummer, cut them, and you'll have a beautiful, manageable purple blanket. Okay, these are things to think about. Plants that are too difficult to manage in a small place, some of the helianthus. If they spread by rhizomes or stolons. Lizard's tail, that's the one we were talking about at Whit Stevens that took up the whole thing. Again, rhizomes and stolons. Plants with huge seed production or seedlings that have strong roots, and that's some of the grasses. Huge seed production, again, stolons. Ragwort, that was a terrible one. These are all ones that you don't want to put in or that you want to think about. You know, you might have a huge area. The common violets, I actually thought it was pretty and dug some up and took them home. I have a whole front yard, and I just use them as a ground cover. And I will admit, a few years ago, I used Roundup. I bet I charged over $1,000 for Roundup to Thomas at Home Depot. It'd turn them yellow, and they'd come back. They drank that stuff like you wouldn't believe. Okay, if they're too large, choose something else. If you like something and you put it in and it doesn't work for you, don't start buying chemicals to try to healthy it up. Take it out. Something else will like your spot. Okay, these are what I want you to commit to memory. When you're doing your research, these should set off red flags in your brain. If they say it's a great plant, it colonizes. Use it in naturalized settings. In open woodland gardens, in wildflower gardens, freely self-seeds. Then a taproot means you can't dig it from the wild and take it home, you'll kill it. It also means that after you've put it in your yard and then you decide you want to move it, you're going to kill it. Helianthus and Salada goldenrod, give extra thought before you put them in. Rhizomes, you can see, they'll go under the ground, and then every place coming up you're going to get, and the stolon and suckers. Those are all things that can cause you problems. Then search, when you get on to search, use that Latin name, and it'll be on the PDF handout if you get it. That way, when you get it, you're going to get more sites that use your .org, .edu, or .gov to get your information, but use the Latin name. Some of the best ones are on the thing, but this last one where it says USDA Natural Resources, when you put in your Latin name and you get 20 hits, one of those is going to be this last one. You can pull it up and there'll be a map of the United States, and it'll tell you if it's a native in Arkansas. And that's a reliable source to use.